remember 2017? I know it seems like a long time ago and a galaxy far, far away, but it did happen. And it's when Star Wars Battlefront 2 launched to mediocre fanfare. The game is mostly remembered now for an aggressive monetization scheme that was so bad that they actually went in and removed it later and gave everyone a bunch of free stuff as a public apology. It was a symbol of EA's money-driven, greedy approach to game design. For those that stuck with it, the game eventually turned out to be pretty fantastic, at least on the multiplayer side, with a ton of free content updates, punching up the roster of all three eras with a ton of new heroes and special units, gameplay that's fast and fun, and way more game modes than are really necessary. They've got a full dogfight sim in here just because they can. The game also had a single-player campaign, a campaign that basically no one talks about anymore, which is funny to me because at the time the game was announced, the campaign was a much bigger deal than the multiplayer. Battlefront 1-2 infamously didn't have a single-player mode, as was the trend at the time with games like Titanfall and Black Ops 4. There was a little period there when developers decided that they no longer needed campaigns, which was not an overly beloved choice by most people. Battlefront 2 was to signal the triumphant return of the single-player campaign, and it was also the triumphant return to Star Wars stories in games, since the last Star Wars game to have a story was The Force Unleashed 2 in 2010. A game that by this point was no longer considered canon, and also it's only like 5 minutes long, but that's besides the point. The first big budget AAA story in the new Star Wars universe, and it left no cultural impact whatsoever. Why? I came late to Battlefront 2. I don't know why exactly. I like Star Wars and I like FPS games, but I never got the first one, and I didn't pick up the second one until about a year and a half later when I picked up for like $10. Because I waited so long, the game I played was very different from the game at launch. The monetization was almost completely gone, the hero roster was double what it was at launch, there was even an extra bit of campaign DLC for free, which we'll get into a bit later. But even back then, nobody cared or was talking about the single player. The idea that these games could survive without a single-player campaign didn't come from nowhere. In fact, I can totally understand how this trend happened. For years, single-player campaigns in games like Call of Duty have been considered nothing more than glossy, glorified tutorials, more of a bonus feature than a reason to actually buy the game. You bought the game for the multiplayer, and completion stats generally back that up. According to achievement statistics, only 58% of players have beaten the first mission of Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. And you can't even die in that mission. This reputation as being a bonus feature is not ideal because these campaigns are expensive and time-consuming to make. The Call of Duty games especially are famous for pushing technical limitations with their single-player campaigns.
We've added fluid dynamics, interactive smoke, and also added an AI system to it. So we have fish move out of the way when you get close to them.
It's rule number one of business, that time is money. If you're putting all of this time and effort into a feature that only half of your player base is actually going to touch, then it's pretty easy to see that you can probably survive without it. And the fact of the matter is, they were right. Fortnite is one of the most successful games of all time, or Overwatch. You don't need a campaign to survive. You never did. Team Fortress 2 is still going strong 16 years later. So why were people so mad when studios started acting on this revelation? Well, I think it's a pretty baseline reaction. You had something, and now you don't. It doesn't matter if statistically the majority of players don't actually touch the campaign mod, or that the fraction of players who will not buy a game because it doesn't have a campaign mod is minor. You had something, and now you don't. Give it back. And so, single-player campaigns came back. And what happened? Exactly the same thing that happened before. Only 40% of players have finished the first mission of Battlefront 2. All that fanfare, all that drama, only for less than half of the player base to even start the campaign. Half of that who even bother to finish it. God, that must be frustrating, right? All these whiny bastards complaining about removing the single player, and you give them one, and none of them even bother to play it. Battlefront 2's single player is not some hidden gem, it's not a secret masterpiece like Titanfall 2. But just like all of them, it's clearly an insane amount of time and effort put into a feature that was never going to get the attention that reflected that. I want to revisit Battlefront 2. It's not a masterpiece, I'm not even entirely sure I think it's good, but it's full of interesting ideas that deserves to be remembered as more than a glossy bonus feature. So even if I'm ripping it to shreds, I think it deserves more attention than it currently gets. So let's talk about Battlefront 2's campaign. Let's talk about Aiden Versio. Battlefront 2 tells the story of Commander Aiden Versio, an Imperial Special Forces agent working during the final days of the Empire following the end of Return of the Jedi and the destruction of the second Death Star. The game plays over the course of a year, dropping in at various significant battles and events. When the Empire unleashes its backup plan, Operation Cinder, a series of satellites that will bombard random planets to sow fear across the galaxy, they first target Aiden's homeworld, where she and some of her squad defect from the Empire and end up joining the rebellion, seeing the war to its conclusion at the Battle of Jakku. That's the broad strokes. The details of the campaign are where things get a little bit stranger. But let's start with one of the most important details that I somehow completely forgot about. The campaign has no loading screens. Every mission to cutscene to next mission flows completely seamlessly, which, technically speaking, is extremely impressive. Obviously the next level is loading during the cutscenes, but even still, the effect is so seamless that it took me a few missions to even notice it was happening. Story-wise though, the lack of downtime causes the pacing of the campaign to feel incredibly fast. I mentioned that this campaign takes place over the course of a year, right? Well, thanks to this little technical trick, the passage of time is extremely hard to pin down. 6 months pass between a single screen transition. This isn't a long campaign. You can wrap up the whole thing in about 4 hours. It's brisk and it moves quickly. There's almost no downtime. You're constantly zipping from battle to battle, which doesn't leave a lot of time for character stuff to come through. I think the most glaring example is just after Aiden and Del, her squad mate, have turned themselves in and meet Lando Calrissian, who offers them a chance to help the rebels.
We don't even know how to fly X-Wings.
It should be easy for Special Forces.
What's the alternative, Aiden?
So, what's it going to be?
Not even a single second given to showing our protagonist pondering one of the most important decisions of her entire life. What makes this cut especially weird is that right before this is a playable walking segment where Lando walks you through the ship. The priority here is backwards. This is just expository dialogue. The important dramatic bit is the point of decision, but it's like the game is worried that if you go longer than a minute without shooting something, you're going to get bored and quit. It's a common complaint of the story that Aiden's redemption feels rushed, but that's because the whole game feels rushed. From start to finish, the entire thing is on speed. There's no breathing room for the audience to think about anything that's just happened because it's always right into the next battle. Half of the time in cutscenes is spent catching up with the massive amount of time that's passed since the last screen wipe. The campaign places action and spectacle above all else, these big dramatic battles and set pieces that are, in all fairness, pretty cool. Of all the Star Wars games I've played, I think Battlefront 2 comes the closest to capturing the feeling of playing a movie, which is clearly what they're going for. It's 4 hours of non-stop action and explosions, and while that element is handled very well, it's also a very strange direction to go in, because non-stop action and explosions is the multiplayer experience. Surely the point of a single-player campaign is to deliver something a little bit deeper than that? We already know the campaign is fighting a losing battle against multiplayer for relevance. I mean, Aiden may be front and centre on the cover, but to most people, Aiden Versio is not the hero of Battlefront 2. I mean, she's literally a hero that you can pick in multiplayer, but nobody's picking Aiden when you can be sheaving it up. The campaign is trying to fight the multiplayer on the same terms, but that's a fight it was never going to win. Focusing on character and personal stakes is the only way that the campaign was ever going to distinguish itself from multiplayer, because that's something that multiplayer can't have. Aiden Versio is an interesting character, or at the very least she has the potential to be an interesting character that you can try and piece together in the glimpses between firefights. What makes it extra strange though is that Aiden's not just fighting multiplayer for relevance, she's also fighting the campaign itself. Because every so often at random intervals the whole thing grinds to a halt so you can go on a random side adventure with one of the characters from the movies. The hero missions are easily the strangest part of the entire Battlefront 2 single-player experience, and damage the game's pacing even more than the snap flash editing. It's only the third mission when Aiden disappears entirely for a random side quest with Luke Skywalker as he searches for something in the Emperor's old holiday house. Yeah, Battlefront 2 was doing Uncanny Valley surprise Luke Skywalker cameos before it was cool. The mission isn't entirely separated. Del shows up and works with Luke to get inside as you fight off some bugs. This mission is where Del starts to doubt the Empire, giving Del a much clearer turning point than Aiden, the main character. That whole snap to redemption thing gets even more bizarre because when you get to the surface of Naboo, the planet Iden and Del have decided to help save, you don't play as Iden, instead it's a mission starring Princess Leia, the most pivotal mission in Iden's story, and you only occasionally hear her over the radio. The mission after this is also a hero mission, starring Han Solo rocking this truly hideous beard. The entire thing is played for comedy with this really annoying Imperial defector guy, and in the end Iden and the crew show up to rescue Han, but you play as Han Solo during the protagonist's rescue of him. It's bizarre. Whenever you introduce characters as important as Leia and Han, they're obviously going to draw some focus from the newer characters. But it's one thing to draw focus and another thing to just take the driver's seat for a bit. It totally kills the pacing of the game and gives Iden even less time in the spotlight than she was already getting with the action focus of the game. She starts to feel like a side character in her own game, and it starts to become a question of why the campaign is even positioned with her as the main character if she's not going to be the main character. You can do a campaign focusing on a single person's perspective on the war, or you can do a thing where you jump around lots of different perspectives to give a broader view of the conflict. But you can't really do both. They contradict each other. I was trying to puzzle out why these missions were included at all. Fan service, maybe? But then I remembered that I joined the game late, when all of the heroes were free to use in multiplayer. That was not the way this was originally envisioned. See, originally you would have to buy each hero using in-game currency, so these missions could be the only way that you could actually play these heroes for a long time. A little teaser, essentially, to convince you to save up and buy them. That's the kind of nonsense good old EA would pull, effectively tanking the pacing of their own single-player game for a psychological trick to convince you to pay up. I love that. It's all a damn shame, because with the tiny amount of spotlight left for Iden, she really does shine through. You just have to be paying really close attention, because you'll literally miss it if you blink. Iden Versio is, in my opinion, a much better realisation of the Stormtrooper turncoat than Finn ever was. I like Finn just fine, but he never gives off the vibes of a guy who's been brainwashed. He's just a regular sort of guy. Iden feels like a soldier. Everything she does she views through the lens of honour and duty and professionalism, and that doesn't change when she defects. In fact, it's exactly those personality traits that lead to her defection in the first place. It's a character archetype that's very hard to get across right. Too cold and uncaring and they just seem like some kind of unfeeling robot. Too warm and personable and they don't feel like a genuine soldier. And I think for the most part the game hits that balance well. An interesting example is her droid. Like Cal Kestis, Iden has a little droid companion, a miniature probe droid that can hack things for you and stun enemies. Throughout the whole campaign, she never gives it a name. It's just droid. It's a neat little contrast between the two characters. Cal and BD-1 are best friends. In Jedi Survivor, Cal always introduces BD to everyone they meet. Iden's droid is primarily a tool, and that's how she views it. Within the wider world of Star Wars and the whole droids' rights thing, that might sound awkward, but let's not go there for now, shall we? She values the droid as a fellow soldier, but you don't get the impression she'd be too torn up if it was destroyed, unlike Cal, who might literally turn to the dark side if something happened to BD-1. Finn never gives off the impression of a guy who bought into the propaganda. Iden absolutely does. In the early mission, she's spouting it like nobody's business. The game could be an in-depth look at how propaganda and conditioning can make a fundamentally good person do bad things. It's not that, but it could be. The pieces are there. Enjoying the story of Battlefront 2 and Iden Versio is an exercise in reading between the lines. Her journey from Imperial Spec Ops to Rebel Hero is perfectly realised and not rushed at all, provided that you assume a whole bunch of important stuff happens when you aren't looking. The game absolutely does not give you enough time with Iden the Loyalist. It leaves it to you to imagine the long career she's had that brought her to command a Special Forces unit. It never shows her childhood on an Imperial world with an admiral for a dad, where loyalty would have been drilled in on a daily basis. It just sort of infers that. I think the actual scene where she defects is quite good. It might seem rushed, but within the rushed pacing of the whole game, I think that works. It's a snap decision. Within the wider between-the-lines story, it's the point where her idea of the Empire from years of propaganda and the reality of the Empire come into conflict. It's her homeworld. It's personal. Sometimes a personal connection is all it takes for someone to rethink these things. Her sense of duty to these innocent civilians overpowers her sense of duty to the Empire. In her own mind, she is doing what the Empire is supposed to be doing. Her and Del don't like having to kill fellow soldiers, but it's a matter of survival, a matter of honour. It's not until later that she realises how untrue that really is, that the Empire never lived up to the idea she had of it. And this whole time she's been fighting on the wrong side. Once again, she realises that off-screen while you're faffing about as Princess Leia, but she realises it nonetheless. The game's pacing makes the whole thing feel like a highlight reel of a much longer story. But it's a highlight reel of a good story, one that I wish we got to see properly unfold. The blossoming romance between Aiden and Del, for example, feels like something that should be more obvious than it is. The nature of the game's pacing means that the parts where Aiden is acting a little bit warmer and out of her usual more professional self around him just sort of seem like her normal personality, because we don't see her normal personality enough for it to be fully formed in your head. I feel like by just showing clips and selectively editing, I could convince you that this is actually a great campaign. It's full of moments that could be iconic if the story was given room to breathe. The second to last mission involves Aiden crashing onto a Star Destroyer in a futile attempt to save her dad. When she gets to the bridge, he refuses to be rescued. The Empire's time has come, and he's going down with it. He doesn't have redemption, he doesn't want one, but he wants his daughter to live. There's no hug goodbye, no I love you. She walks away, and he goes down with the ship.
You saw the Empire's weakness, and refused to let it consume you. It makes you stronger. That's why you're leaving here without me.
Deserves better than this.
No, I don't, but you do, Aiden. You deserve to live in peace. Go. Survive. Live.
I think the acting in this scene is great. The intention is there. But this is the third time they've talked to each other on screen. For it to have its proper emotional impact, there had to be more time spent with Aiden and more time exploring the strange relationship she has with her dad. Likewise, I think this shot of Aiden and the crew overlooking the battlefield is really cinematic and kind of beautiful. I love the ambiguity of the emotions on her face. We've never seen her get this emotional before. Is it tears of happiness because the war is over? Or is it despair for her dad and all of the soldiers who had to die because they could never see through the propaganda? I don't know. It could be both. It could be neither. I do know that you don't get time to think of it because it immediately cuts to the surprise final mission 30 years later where you're playing as Kylo Ren invading Del's mind to find the map to Luke Skywalker. I know that sounds insane, undercutting the victory of the previous level by immediately killing off one of the main characters. It's kind of insane, but it's more frustrating than anything else, because it's a pretty cool mission. Battlefront's lightsaber mechanics leave a lot to be desired, but jumping through dreamscape versions of previous levels of the game is neat. It ends with Hask, your old thought-dead squadmate who couldn't leave the Empire, revealed to be alive, and he shoots Del in bitter frustration, leaving the ship empty as a trap for Aiden. It's frustrating because it's a really intriguing setup for a story. It makes the whole previous 4 hours feel like a prologue to the actual story with more personal stakes and drama. Del and Hask are not the most fleshed out characters, but in this scene the acting and the emotion really come through. You can feel the history even if we haven't seen it. And then the game just ends. Aiden's story continues in multiplayer. No, it doesn't. That's just a bold-faced lie. Aiden's story does continue in a bit of free DLC called Resurrection, a short bonus campaign set after the events of the epilogue during the sequel era, making it one of the only pieces of media besides the movies to actually explore that era of Star Wars in any detail. Specifically, it's set during the events of The Force Awakens. It's a frustrating chunk of content, primarily frustrating because it's actually quite good. It's way better paced than anything in the main story, with a much tighter focus. The levels follow sequentially, they don't skip months of time. Aiden and Del had a daughter, Zay, and Aiden's characterization as Captain Mum is great. She's still a soldier, and it's clear that one of her primary priorities as a mum was teaching her kid how to be a badass, to the point where they skipped the usual parent cliches of being overprotective. She trusts her daughter to thrive, right right in the thick of it. Her droid also has a name now, Dio, which I think is a nice touch. After 30 years with the guy, they've clearly been through enough that the relationship has changed. I think the scene where she tells her daughter that Del is dead is excellent. She doesn't sugarcoat it. She looks her straight in the eyes and says it. Not in an uncaring way, just in a direct way. It conveys so much of what she's like as a mother, firm and possibly coming across as cold a lot of the time, but fundamentally caring and good. And then Aiden dies, and it's kinda dumb. There's a confrontation with Hask where he has Zay hostage. Zay escapes, but Aiden gets hit in the crossfire, and then 5 minutes later she just collapses and dies. The scene itself is fine, it's well acted like the rest of the game, but it's disappointing because it's just the most boring generic thing they could have possibly done, passing the torch on to the next generation, when Mama Bear Aiden had plenty of story potential left in her. I mean, every Tom, Dick and Sally is being stabbed or shot through the stomach and surviving, so they could easily bring her back, but it seems like it'll be some time before we ever see Aiden Versio again. People are clamouring to see Cal Kestis or even Starkiller show up in one of the live-action shows. Not so much for Aiden Versio, even though timeline-wise it would make way more sense for her to show up in one of these Mandoverse shows. She's a character with lots of potential in a game that had no interest in actually using that potential. Battlefront 2 is a multiplayer shooter. That's what it will be remembered as. That's all it really wanted to be. It only included a single-player campaign to appease whiners like me. It lives up to every expectation of a single-player campaign in a multiplayer shooter. It's a glossy, technically impressive, bonus feature tutorial that gets you ready for multiplayer. And that's fine. It's fine. But it could have been great. The game genuinely didn't need a single-player mode, and I respect the effort that went into making one anyway, as I do for most of these tacked-on single-player modes. When you make something like this, you're essentially making an entirely separate game within the same framework. You need cutscenes and advanced AI and a whole bunch of stuff that you don't need in multiplayer. It's a ton of extra work, and even if they don't get it quite right, I think it deserves to be remembered, good or bad.
That means you must be Zay. I'm terribly sorry to hear about your mother. She was a complicated woman, but the galaxy was far better with her in it.
Thank you for watching, and a very special thank you to my wonderful patrons for your continued support. If you'd like to see your name up here or get access to exclusive Patreon videos, I'm currently doing some bi-weekly rambles on my thoughts about Ahsoka, so if that interests you, you can find the link in the description, or wait a few seconds for the magic Patreon box to appear. I have a whole host of Star Wars videos to check out, like this one about Starkiller, or this one about Andor. This video's over now, so you may as well click onto one of the other ones.